Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, Delivering Business and Operational Resiliency in 2021 and Beyond. I'm Simon Marvel. I'm the CEO and founder of Acuity Risk Management. We're a London-based provider of GRC software and services through our Stream Integrated Risk Manager platform. My background before Acuity was at a consulting firm, Insight Consulting, which specialised in risk management and business continuity. We did a lot of work following on from the City of London bombings in the 1990s on developing, implementing and exercising business continuity plans. And another part of our business was focused on information security. But at that time, cyber breaches couldn't really cause an existential risk to business. So these two parts of our consulting business were fairly separate, although there's a little bit of overlap. And how things have changed now. Now we see a wide range of interconnected risks that can cause material harm to the business. Pandemics, cyber attacks, operational failures, supply chain disruptions, and so on. And these are events that are really happening. They're not just theoretical risks, and they're not risks that can necessarily be prevented. So we need to look at building resilience in the face of these risks. And so that's the topic of today's webinar. I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Rasmussen. I'm sure that most of you will know Michael already, but for those of you who don't, he's widely known as the father of GRC, governance, risk management and compliance, being the first to define and model the GRC market in February 2002 when he was at the analyst firm Forrester. With over 27 years of experience, Michael helps organizations improve GRC processes, design and implement GRC architecture, and select technologies that are effective, efficient, and agile. He's a sought after keynote speaker, author, and advisor, and we're delighted to have him with us for this webinar. This webinar, in fact, is the third in a series of three. We previously run with Michael webinars on Agile and cognitive GRC in the context of a dynamic business, and new paradigms in enterprise risk management. Both of these are available on demand via our website. In addition to today's webinar, there will be a third in a couple of weeks' time on April the 7th, and this will talk about the future of GRC, Stream in Action. The three webinars, including today's, that we've done with Michael are all thought leadership pieces. There's no product placement or promotion in these webinars, but there will be an opportunity in the final webinar on April the 7th to see how Stream supports and addresses the issues that we've been talking about in the three previous webinars. The agenda for today, following on from my introduction, I'll hand over to Michael. He'll talk for about 30 minutes on business and operational resiliency. The two of us will then have a discussion around some of the points and issues that were raised. I'll introduce some further resources to support the webinar that you might be interested in, and then I'll leave time at the end for audience questions and answers. So on that point, please do put your questions in the chat on the portal. I may weave some of these into the discussion that we have, or certainly pick them up at the Q&A session at the end, and it will be a great opportunity for you to hear Michael's thoughts. Finally, please do complete the survey form that pops up at the end of the webinar. Give us your feedback, suggestions on topics for future webinars. That will be very helpful to us in framing the content of the next series. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Michael.
It is a pleasure to be here today with you, Simon, and I'm looking forward to spending this next virtual hour with everybody, discussing, the challenges of operational resiliency. I don't think I have screenboard and mouse control if you want to hand that over to me. But today's challenges in business are very dynamic. And my job is to actually, help organizations address uncertainty in their business by research. I don't like to refer to myself as a consultant, although I guess you can say that what I do is some professional advisory services. I'm a research analyst. I spend my time understanding what are the challenges organizations face in context of governance, risk management, and compliance, and how they go about solving those challenges with strategy, process, and particularly technology. And so today we're going to talk about delivering business and operational resiliency in 2021 and beyond, one of the significant challenges I see organizations trying to address in their overall GRC strategies and processes is resiliency. But let's first understand what business is today. Business is navigating chaos. Think about it. Regulations are changing minute by minute, second by second. For example, global financial services firms are dealing with 200 regulatory change events every business day coming from approximately 1,000 regulators around the world. On top of that, the risk environment's changing. Geopolitical risks, economic risks, shifts in society demands and technology risks. But the business itself is changing. Strategy, processes, technology, business relationships, mergers and acquisition. Business is dynamic. It's changing minute by minute and second by second. We've got to be able to keep all this risk in sync and see the big picture of risk in organizations, which has become quite a challenge for the organization to be able to address. It's sort of like the butterfly effect, where you have the flutter of the butterfly's wings in the Netherlands makes tiny atmospheric changes that can influence the development path of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Those little things down in the weeds matter, and we have to be able to see those changes and those implications on our processes, our strategy, our objectives of the organization to be a resilient organization, as well as to be an agile organization. All this is significant. Leonardo da Vinci stated, "Realize that everything connects to everything else." Stated another way, the physicist Fritjof Capra stated, the more we study the major problems of our times, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent. The physicist here was talking about biological ecosystems, but it applies so well to risk management and resiliency in organizations today, that our problems, that our risks of our business, that we can't understand them in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent. Resiliency requires a lot of interaction with other parts of the organization. Strong business and operational resiliency will bring together risk management, business continuity, vendor third-party management. Think about it. Half of your typical organization is not defined by brick and mortar walls or traditional employees. The modern organization is the extended enterprise. If we weren't in lockdowns and we walked down the halls of the corporate offices and sat in the corporate conference rooms, half the people we encounter are not employees. They are third parties. I was talking to a global automobile manufacturer, and their challenge is that they're restructuring their enterprise risk and resiliency program and strategy because they have to address the extended enterprise. The people working on their systems and processes and delivering on that, half of them are not traditional employees. They are third parties. And we need to be able to manage this across the extended enterprise. Today's problems are systemic problems and risks and challenges. They are interconnected and interdependent. It means that we need to bring together several different roles, departments, and functions in the organization to be able to address this. This last year, 2020, made this very apparent. Operational risk and resiliency has changed. What starts with a health and safety risk with COVID-19 has this cascading downstream impact with all these other risks in the organization. We have IT security risks in the home office environment. I look around me, the TV behind me is connected to the internet. The speaker in front of me is connected to the internet. My wall outlets all around me are connected to the internet. My blender down in my kitchen is connected to the internet. I can program it with my iPhone if I wanted to. I don't know why I'd want to, but I could. And some Trojan horse or vulnerability isn't in any of these devices, it could compromise my home office network. And therefore, my laptop with the data of my clients and connections I have, that's the reality of the environment today. COVID-19 leads to IT security risks. You might say, oh, Trojan horse, really? Well, think just a couple months back, SolarWinds. An exposure, vulnerability, Trojan horse compromised hundreds of significant organizations around the world. It's real. But not only was it IT security risks, it's increased risk of fraud. That employees that normally do good things because of the economic constraints of the virus and pandemic might choose to commit that fraud. We've seen increased risk of bribery and corruption. Those foreign government officials, supply chains are constrained, import, export, and customs are constrained, limited government contracts and permits, they're all constrained. Somebody might bribe a foreign government official to expedite them over somebody else. We've seen increased risk of modern slavery as factories have gone dark, and then because employees are sick, and then they restaff people with child labor and forced labor. We're seeing resiliency risks in our supply chains as goods are limited and they're backed up at ports and there's limited shipping containers. We moved all these medical device equipment to Africa in places, and we have all these big shipping containers over in Africa, and in the shipping lanes between Asia and the US and places like that, or Europe, they don't have a number of shipping containers to move goods overseas. We have all these resiliency issues all because of a virus. It's interconnected. Like Leonardo da Vinci said, that everything's connected to everything else. And the physicist Fritjof Capra, more than we study the major problems of our times, the more we come to realize that they're systemic problems. They're interconnected and interdependent. Operational risk and resiliency requires us to see the big picture of all this. Now, risk management itself is the ability to address uncertainty as we try to achieve objectives. And let's unpack the ISO 31000 definition of risk. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. They can be overall strategic entity level objectives, division, department, operational, process, project, asset level objectives. And we manage risk in the uncertainty in trying to achieve those objectives. And that's absolutely critical, that we understand the opportunities and the objectives and the uncertainty around all this in the organization. And that's critical that we address this and be able to manage this, which requires holistic insight and being able to see the interconnected nature of risks so that we can develop the resilient enterprise, the agile and resilient enterprise. So we're seeing a lot of focus on resilience, on business and operational resilience. And resilience is that ability to respond and react quickly to events in the organization and to bounce back. But also, as we'll talk about in a few slides, there's another aspect to this, the agility of the organization to actually navigate and avoid events as well. But how do we develop business and operational resiliency, particularly in the context of all the change? The resilient organization has to continuously monitor change in the environment. The volumes of legal and regulatory change, as I already referenced, global financial services firms are dealing with 200 regulatory change events every business day, coming from about 1,000 regulators around the world. That's just one industry. Life sciences, healthcare. There's lots of regulations out there. But we have to deal with legal and regulatory change as it impacts the organization. We have to monitor the external risk environment and geopolitical and industry and technology shifts and things. But we also have to monitor the internal business environment, strategy, processes, technologies, new employees. New employees come into the organization, other change roles and responsibilities in the organization, third-party relationships and mergers and acquisitions. The resilient organization is about trying to keep all this change in sync and reconcile and understand all this change contextually to keep our continuity plans and things up to date and current in the organization. So today's modern organization needs to be able to see the tree as well as the forest. That individual system and process and risk being the tree, as well as the forest, the interconnectedness of systems and processes and risks. Now, when I present on this slide in my workshops, people love the analogy. But I've also been challenged on it, once in San Francisco and once in London. Both said the same thing, that in our environments, it's more than the tree and the forest, it's also about the leaves and the branches. Talking about operational resiliency, we might outsource 8 data centers, like a bank in San Francisco said to me, to Oracle. We need to know that 7 of them, or 6 of them, whatever it is, touch EU GDPR information, and which 1 or 2 do not. The global bank in London said we might have an outsourcer service provider relationship, with a Tata or an Accenture or somebody. We can't just manage things at that relationship level if that's a tree. We got to get down to the leaves and the branches. We got to get down and understand, the 100 different contracts and service level agreements and the risks in each of those. We have to see the leaves, the branches, the trees, the forest, and how all this interconnects with each other. But if you're trying to do all this with documents, spreadsheets, and emails, it's what I call the inevitability of failure, manual processes. I was talking to one firm that was spending 200 employee hours to build a report for the board of directors, because they had to reconcile thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails, and assessments, and analysis, and everything else. And it took them 200 hours. One employee, 5 weeks of time at a 40-hour work week to build this report. All to find out that they had a risk and resiliency issue that started 11 months ago and grew out of control. And now it's a significant issue. That's not managing resiliency. That's not managing risk. That's reacting to risk. That's not a resilient organization. Another firm I was interacting with, on an RFP in this space. They went to RFP because their business continuity, risk management, and IT security resources, 80% of their staff time is nothing more than document reconcilers. 80% of their time is just trying to manage documents, and only 20% of their time trying to manage risk and be resilient and improve things. You know, manual processes encumbered to document spreadsheets and emails is the inevitability of failure in this area. So we're moving from a past to a future. A past of manual processes encumbered by document spreadsheets and emails to a future of an integrated GRC architecture, information technology architecture that can see the big picture and give us real-time information and insight at a push of a button, not 200 hours later after reconciling all these documents. We're moving from a past of different departments not talking or collaborating with each other, like operational risk and business continuity and vendor third-party risk and IT security, to a future of operational risk and resiliency. And my friends, I might cross some paths here with swords with you here, and you might not agree with me, but I think the writing's on the wall that business continuity management is only going to be around for a short period of time. Organizations are moving over the next 2 to 3 years to operational risk and resiliency. I've been saying this for over 15 years. Why do we have different departments, doing very similar things? It doesn't make sense. I've talked to the line of business where they're screaming, this week it's an operational risk assessment. Next week it's a business continuity assessment. The week after that it's an IT security assessment. Half the questions I'm answering this week in the operational risk assessment are the same questions they're asking next week in the business continuity assessment. It's a tax on the business. And so I'm seeing organizations strategize and move forward. And how do we bring together operational risk, business continuity, and vendor third party, and these others into a singular strategy? And so that's the future. We're moving from a past where we had responsibility to a future of greater accountability for resiliency. And one of those areas is in the accountability regimes, like the UK senior managers regime and certification regime, Ireland's SEER regulation, senior executive accountability regime, Australia's BEAR regime, banking executive accountability regime, Hong Kong's managers in charge regime, Singapore's individual accountability and conduct regime. Now these are broad, but in scope, not just about operational resiliency, but they include operational resiliency. In the UK, under the UK SMCR, you have to have a senior management function that is accountable, not just responsible, but accountable for operational resiliency. There's a difference. In the past, it was about responsibilities, and I can outsource responsibilities. I can take tasks and give them to somebody else to do, but you cannot outsource accountability. The buck stops here. If there's an issue with operational resilience, that senior management function, if there's willful wrongdoing, can go to jail. If there's negligence or lack of due diligence, that senior management function can be personally fined out of their bank account, not the corporation's bank account. That's accountability. We're moving from a past of responsibilities that are scattered and distributed for operational resiliency to a future of greater accountability that cannot be given to other people. So the agile and resilient organization. I talk a lot about resilience. It's a very popular topic, but I think we're missing a point here that, there's a flip side to this. Not only do we need to be a resilient organization, we also need to be an agile organization. It's like two sides of the coin. It's like the yin and yang. Agility is the ability to move quickly and easily, ability to think and understand quickly. It's to be able to navigate your environment with success. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, ability to have a substance or object, in this case a business, to spring back into shape when there is an event. Agility helps us navigate around events to minimize or even avoid the impact. Resilience helps us to recover from an event. And we need both. And so even though we're talking about resiliency today, to me, organizations should be thinking about agility and resilience and how they work together and have a symbiotic relationship with each other. And we need also to understand what's the difference between business resilience and enterprise risk, and operational resilience and operational risk, and how they work. Business resilience is this top-down approach aligned with strategy and objectives and performance. Well, operational resilience often is, operational resilience and risk is often this bottom-up in the weeds of the processes and things and works up. And there is a difference. I get frustrated because I see a lot of miscommunication out there. One miscommunication I see is that operational resilience is for financial services organization and business resilience is for other industries. People erroneously think this because there's operational resilience regulation and guidance, like the FCA, Bank of England, PRA guidance in the United Kingdom, the EU's Digital Operational Resiliency Act, the Basel and Bank of International Settlements, their operational resilience guidance, and the U.S. Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. And their operational resilience, or even Australia's Prudential Regulatory Authority, operational resilience guidance. There's a lot of operational resilience, use of the term operational resilience in financial services. So some people think, well, operational resilience is for financial services, and then we'll talk business resilience for everybody else. That's a bunch of crud. Operational, every business has operations, whether you're a healthcare organization, whether you're a government organization, whether you're life sciences, hospitality, retail, manufacturing, you name it, every organization has operations. And so we have operational resilience issues as well as business resilience issues. I define business resilience as the overall resilience of the organization, including its strategic resilience, its liquidity, like capital resilience, that we have enough cash on hand to weather issues and events, the cultural and integrity resilience of the organization, and the operational resilience. So business resilience is broader because it looks at strategic resilience, liquidity resilience, and the cultural integrity resilience, as well as operational resilience. Operational resilience is a part, but just one part of several of business resilience. Operational resilience is a component of business resilience focused on internal processes, services, people, systems, relationships, and external events. Strong operational resilience requires an integration of business continuity management, operational risk management, and even third-party risk management. You look at the regulatory guidance from the Bank of England and FCA and PRA, and it mentions like third-party vendor risk like 30 times in the document. The extended enterprise is significant. You cannot be a resilient organization without addressing third-party risks in the vendors, suppliers, outsourcers, service providers, and more in the organization. Operational resilience requires us to focus on third-party relationships. But operational resilience also requires this integration of operational risk and business continuity. I've been saying this for over 15 years. I do not understand why organizations have separate operational risk departments and business continuity departments. They should be one and the same. It makes absolutely no sense. And my friends, with all the focus on operational resilience, my crystal ball prediction is 2-3 years from now, business continuity becomes a thing of the past. That we're going to move from business continuity and disaster recovery programs to operational risk and resiliency programs. Now there are going to still be business continuity programs 2 or 3 years from now, but they're going to be the organizations that are reactive and trailing. The forward-thinking organizations are going to be integrating and bringing together operational risk and business continuity into a program that's called operational risk and resiliency. That's the way I see it. Business continuity is going to be dying as it integrates, becomes a part of operational risk management. Not always a popular thing because a lot of people have built up their careers and their certifications, everything else in business continuity. But you can look at it as a negative, or you can see it as an opportunity to grow and expand and lead in this area. So let's look at some definitions of operational resilience. I'm going to read each of these to you. I know you're not supposed to read slides, but I think it's important because I want to dissect these and tell you which I like and which I do not like. So let's read them first, and then I'll analyze them and give you my opinion. First off, the United Kingdom's FCA, Bank of England, PRA definition. We define operational resilience as the ability of firms and FMIs and the financial sector as a whole to prevent, adapt, respond to, recover, and learn from operational disruptions. Next, the EU DORA, Digital Operational Resiliency Act. Digital operational resilience means the ability of a financial entity to build, assure, and review its operational integrity from a technological perspective by ensuring either directly or indirectly through the use of services of ICT third-party providers, the full range of ICT-related capabilities needed to address the security of the networks and information systems which a financial entity makes use of and which support the continued provision of financial services and their quality. That's the longest one. U.S. Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Operational resilience is the ability to deliver operations, including critical operations and core business lines, through a disruption from any hazard. It is the outcome of effective operational risk management combined with sufficient financial and operational resources to prepare, adapt, withstand, recover from disruptions. Basel the Bank for International Settlements says the committee defines operational resilience as the ability of a bank to deliver critical operations through disruption. This ability enables a bank to identify and protect itself from threats and potential failures, respond and adapt, as well as recover and learn from disruptive events. Now I'm going to get out my little pen tool here. Let's look at these. What do I like and what do I not like? First off, I do not, oh, my pen tool's not working, back. I do not like the DORA definition. Why? First off, it just focuses on digital operational resilience. You know, and to me, you know, operational resilience is much more than just the digital aspects. It's very myopic in its thinking. And this legislation could have been so much broader on operational resilience like the other guidance that we have here. But it's just focused on the digital operational resilience. And what we learned from COVID is there's a lot of human resources and processes and everything else that fled into this as well. It's more than just that digital word. And so that's why I don't like that one. It's also very lengthy and wordy. That's my least favorite. My next to least favorite would be the Basel Committee, this one here. I mean, it's not overly bad, but you know, the problem I have with this is that it's the ability of the bank to deliver critical operations through disruption, and to be able to identify and protect itself from threats, potential failures, respond and adapt as recover from disruptive events. When I read that definition, it's all reactive. You know, it defines operational resilience as the ability of a bank to deliver critical operations through disruption. You know, it's all reactive and not proactive. And so there's elements that are okay. It's better than the EU DORA, but it's my second to least favorite. Next, and I actually think it's a pretty good definition, is the OCC definition from the United States. And what I like about this definition is that it's the outcome of effective operational risk management. You know, again, my friends, business continuity is going to be a thing of the past in a few years as people move towards operational risk and resiliency. And here you have the US regulators saying operational resiliency is an outcome of effective operational risk management, not an outcome of effective business continuity management. It's being led by operational risk. So operational, I like that part of this. But I also find that it's, again, very reactive. When you read this, it's the ability to deliver operations, including critical operations, through a disruption from any hazard. You know, that's the weakness of this definition as well. It's reactive. All three of these I find to be reactive and not proactive definitions, but I like how the US OCC pulls out operational risk. My favorite definition, the one I give the gold star to, I'll circle the whole thing here. Oh, my pen tool messed up, is the UK definition. And this one is the shortest definition, but it's the most accurate. We define operational resilience as the ability of firms as a whole to prevent, ooh, that's an interesting word, and adapt, respond, recover, and learn. That's a good word too. Now, it's not the first time we saw the word learn. I mean, we also saw that word down here in the Basel definition, to learn from disruptive events. But it is in the UK definition that we learned that we're not repeating our issue. But the thing that really makes the UK definition stand out is it's the one that front and center puts prevent. You know, I mentioned a couple slides ago that agility aspect. It's more than resiliency, it's agility. The UK definition brings agility and resilience together because we have the ability here in this definition to prevent, to navigate our environment where we might even avoid events, not just respond to events. All three of these other definitions are really written about responding to events. The UK definition is the only one that brings in the idea of agility and being able to avoid or prevent events. So operational resilience requires a collaboration on overall strategy, process, and technology in your organization. And so we need to have this top-down operational resilience strategy that brings together different functions. And I mentioned operational risk, business continuity, third parties, and others. And then we define our operational risk management processes, which, you know, define and document the services and processes of the organization, as well as impact tolerances on those, and the information technology architecture that can support this. From there, we need to be able to monitor a lot of change that impacts operational resilience. Change in the external context, such as laws and regulations, technology shifts, industry practices and things, as well as changes in the internal environment. We need to be able to monitor all that change to see how it impacts the organization and funnel it in and understand it contextually within the mission, vision, and values of the organization, the strategy, process, and roles. I do our risk assessments and identify the policies and controls that need to be put in place to become a resilient organization. It means we have to bring in a lot of different data points on uncertainty, risk, and change in the business, understanding these contextually and map these together that we can build out action items from it. It means that we need to have an integrated operational risk and resiliency information architecture that can map risks to the objectives. We have strategic entity level objectives, department process objectives, and risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives according to ISO 31000. And if we want to be resilient, we're trying to manage that uncertainty so we can reliably achieve objectives and address uncertainty. And so risks need to map to objectives. Risks need to map to the organizational structure. Where is this risk in the organization? Is it an entity strategic level risk, a process level risk, an asset level risk like EU citizen data and GDPR? What regulatory obligations introduce risks and risk exposure and reporting requirements? Policies. I'm a big fan of policies. Every policy is a risk document. Now, very few organizations have an accurate index of what policies they have in their environment. In fact, I was keynoting at one conference and asked the audience, a couple hundred people in the room, who in this room actually has a master index of everything that's an official policy of the organization. 2 people out of 200 raised their hand. A lot of organizations don't even know what policies they have, but policies are risk documents. Every policy in your organization was written because there's a risk. There wouldn't be a policy if there wasn't a risk, and that risk was significant enough that somebody had to sit down and write a policy to be able to control that risk and address that risk. And then you have to understand roles, the risk owner, the risk subject matter expert, issues, incidents, complaints, investigations where risk has materialized in the past. Do you have an accurate insight into how risk has materialized in the past so you can be a resilient organization and populate your risk models with objective, not subjective information and quantitative information on how this risk is materialized and how often it's materialized in the past so you have objective risk assessments. And of course, how are the controls doing to mitigate risk in the environment? We need that solid information architecture. Technology provides automation and tracking for operational resilience and risk, where we can get those management dashboards and reports at a click of a button. It doesn't take 200 employee hours to build that and find out that we had a risk issue that started 11 months ago that's out of control now. We have strong audit trail and system of record of who did what, when, how, and why. Good workflow and tasks so things don't slip through the cracks. Collaboration and enforcement. But the benefits of automating operational resiliency, we can break into 3 categories: efficiency, effectiveness, and agility. Efficiency is the time saved from manual processes, simplified and streamlined processes, reduction in reporting time, reduced staff needed. Effectiveness means less things slipping through cracks, getting missed, a strong audit trail and a defensible system of record of all operational risk and resiliency activities and assessments and plans. And it allows for easier conversations with executives, stakeholders, and frontline employees. And agility is the ability to have an ease of configuration to adapt your resiliency solution to a changing regulatory, risk, and business environment. And being able to manage resiliency as business processes and roles change and evolve in the organization and keep your business system and process documentation current to the current environment, not from the environment 2 or 3 years ago. Streamline agility in business change like mergers and acquisitions, and quickly identify the needs for new obligations, roles, responsibilities, and tasks. Now, how do we build an operational resiliency strategy? It first starts with understanding where you're at today, your current state, and where do you want to be 2 or 3 years from now, your future state, and what's your project plan to get there to become it. So your current state might be these decentralized functions that don't talk to each other, like risk management and business continuity and third party and IT, security, and others that don't really talk or collaborate with each other. That might be your current state, and a lot of manual processes of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. And your future state is an integrated operational risk and resiliency strategy supported by common processes and a common information technology architecture. What's your current state today, and then what's your future state that you want to be at in 2 or 3 years? And then next question is, who needs to be on the team? You know, this isn't about trying to consolidate under one reporting role. A lot of times it's a federated strategy where somebody leads it, like operational risk management, but it involves connecting other departments to be part of the strategy, like business continuity and IT and security and third-party vendor risk and things. But who needs to be on the team, and how do you get them to work together and share the same vision and strategy so you can work and collaborate together and be on the same page? The next one's a really important one. You want to select the right equipment for your operational resiliency journey. I see too many of these projects fail because maybe they already have a solution in place that is working for one department, and they just say, oh, let's just see how far we can get with this and build upon it, and find out that they're going to climb this mountain and only have enough rope to get up halfway. You know, you don't just throw everything in a bag. You carefully select your equipment for your operational resiliency journey. You know, what is the right technology platform that can get you to the future state you're trying to get to in 2 or 3 years? Because projects fail when, you know, a year and a half into it, it's like, oh, we have the wrong technology. We got to roll back and start all over again. And so you want to select the right technology that can deliver on your future state. And you also want to break things down into stages. Operational resiliency is complex because business is complex. Remember navigating chaos and the whole picture I started with and how complex business is today? You're not going to change the organization in 1 month. And so you need to break things down into stages. If you climb Mount Everest too fast, it's very simple what happens to you. You die. You've got to get up to the first base camp, and your body actually has to acclimate to the altitude before you're actually physically ready to get to the next level. The same thing with an operational resiliency project is you need to break it down into achievable stages and not take on too much too quickly. And then you always need to be prepared. Last year, it was COVID-19. Now we're coming out of COVID-19. Next month, it might be an asteroid or alien invasion or who knows what else. But, you know, most likely it's not going to be one of those, but it could be like a big merger or acquisition or a new regulatory issue that you have to face. Your journey is never over, and you have to constantly adapt the organization to be resilient because business and the world are constantly changing and evolving. It's not static. So we're aiming to become the operational resilient organization, where we get 360-degree contextual awareness of operational resilience because we're more aware of our risks across the organization. This allows us to align different departments and functions to address this integrated and interconnected risk environment. Therefore, we can find and address risks responsively to contain them when they're still small risks before they become big events. This enables us to be agile and maybe hopefully avoid and prevent things like in the FCA Bank of England PRA definition, to be agile and navigate around events. But also events will happen where we need resilience and to be able to recover quickly from them, and to do so in a way that is efficient with our use of human capital and financial capital resources. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Acuity to discuss what Q&A we have now.
Michael, thank you very much indeed for that. Please do keep your questions coming in if you'd like to. If you have any questions for Michael on what he's just presented, please put them in the chat box, and we'll come on to those at the end of this session. Michael, there's a sort of couple of topics that I'm sort of quite interested in discussing with you, and I'd like to start off with sort of fairly generally the scope of business and operational resilience. And apparently pandemic risk was at the top of some governments' risk registers. It was a known risk, but even then, most countries, not all, but most countries seem to have been terribly unprepared for the COVID-19, which I guess highlights the importance of being prepared and resilient. But clearly, we can struggle even with known risks, but there are also unknown risks out there. So I wonder if you had any thoughts on how we can go about making ourselves resilient to risks that we don't yet know about.
And that's where, you know, in our last webinar, I didn't have the slide in this webinar, we talked about left brain and right brain risk thinking. That we have our left brain risk thinking with our risk models and structures and things, which is more of the logical, mathematical side of risk, which is important. But we also need the creative right brain risk thinking, which sometimes is lacking, where we can think creatively about risk and risk relationships and how scenarios might unfold and impact the organization, and where our models for risk might actually break down. We need to bring together both creative and logical risk thinking together and have the right personalities from the organization deliver on that. Another thing is we just need to be paying attention. I get really frustrated when I see people talking about the pandemic as if it was a black swan event. I'm sorry, my friends, if you think so, but being unprepared for a risk doesn't make it a black swan event. We've had pandemics since the dawn of time. I'm a student of medieval history. If you saw the bookshelves behind me, hey, they're stacked with books on medieval history. And we had the Black Plague and plague after plague in the Middle Ages. We had, the Spanish flu 100 years ago that killed over 50 million people. Now, if you think of the Spanish flu today with today's, jet airplanes and interconnected business world and everything else, I mean, the Spanish flu, without factoring in, healthcare and things like that advances, could have been hundreds of millions, a billion or more. I mean, the Spanish flu was at a time where it was hard to travel. It took weeks to get across the ocean in the Titanic and other things, in the big ship liners in those days. And it's killed 50 million people then. Think of that today. And the World Economic Forum has had the pandemics on their global risk report for years. And we've been warned about it by Bill Gates and others as well. I wrote a paper in December of 2019, before COVID was front page news. I wrote a blog on my blog. You can go out there and read it, called A Tale of Two Futures. Is our future a Star Trek future or a Blade Runner future? And I can specifically call out in that paper that enterprise and operational risk management programs are unbalanced. They're like completely focused on IT risks, which is a big issue. I'm not downplaying IT risk, but I'm saying is that we have more risk than just IT risk in the organization. And I specifically mentioned the World Economic Forum global risk reports that have been putting pandemics and climate change at the top of the risk, and you don't see organizations talking about that. A month later, we start seeing COVID on the front page, and it proves my point. We need to start thinking and understanding risks more broadly and their impact from a macro level, like global risk, down to the micro level in the business, and thinking about this creatively as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Just taking that a step further, other than aliens or asteroids, do you have any thoughts on emerging or anticipated risks that we need to make sure that we're resilient to from 2021 and beyond? What do you see sort of practically as emerging risks that we should be concerned about?
Well, I mean, definitely you have the pandemic and future pandemics. That's going to be on the radar. Unfortunately, history repeats itself because nobody's listening the first time around. So there's like some period of time that, pandemics can be front and center, and then all of a sudden it's going to slowly fall off the radar over years. Hopefully that's not going to happen, but that's the way things tend to happen. But I mean, one of the big things that is on the focus now is climate change, and we're seeing a huge focus on environmental risks out there. And, IT risk is absolutely huge and needs to stay on the agenda. But my point earlier was it can't be the only thing on the agenda. But you see things like the SolarWinds breach and everything that's gone on with like the Microsoft hack and things recently. This is significant. We need to be able to monitor and keep abreast of security vulnerabilities and the extended enterprise as well. Another big risk that is getting a lot of attention is the integrity of the organization. Does it have the right values on like harassment and discrimination and human rights and things like that? I mean, these are all things that we have to closely monitor, not just within our organization, but across our extended business enterprise.
Okay, thank you, Michael. My next question really just around the definition. I like the FCA definition of operational risk, as you do, looking at prevention as well as response, recovery, and learning from operational disruptions. I think one of the things that you brought out also very clearly is that business is changing at a faster rate than ever before. So there's a need to address resiliency as business changes. But how do you do that without impeding on business change or limiting potential opportunity?
Well, I think it's building a strong risk culture. And part of that is also integrating business change with operational risk and resiliency, that we keep our documentation current and minimize the overall additional impact on risk and resiliency assessments and processes, so that risk and resiliency is an integrated part of business change. And as the business changes and evolves, our operational risk and resiliency processes, models, and plans evolve with it.
Thank you. Finally, then, just on this sort of topic area, building resilience costs money, sometimes lots of it. How do we determine where to build resilience and where to accept the risk?
I mean, that's going to have to, that's where I feel operational risk management leading resiliency instead of business continuity becomes very critical, because we aim where our risks are the most significant. Where our risk exposure to the business is the most significant is the first areas that we develop our resilience plans.
Yeah, absolutely. I think getting some sort of sense of materiality versus appetite is probably important here as well.
Oh, that's exactly it. That where our risk exposure is the greatest is going to have to require some type of quantitative analysis of risk and the materiality and impact of that risk. And when we rank our risks, not just subjectively high, medium, low, red, yellow, green, or in a heat map, but actually quantitatively in the actual, monetary impact on the organization, that helps us rank risk and understand which ones have the most exposure to the organization that we need to address.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, exactly. I mean, just on that point around quantification, clearly, as you pointed out, interconnectedness of business and risk means that we need to be able to sort of understand and aggregate and normalize risk and so on. And we need to do that in relation to critical asset suppliers and dependencies. And that's really difficult to do, and I would say sort of potentially dangerous with qualitative risk assessments. I mean, how do you aggregate two yellow risks? Do two yellow risks make a red? What about two red risks? What do they make? And so on. So
a bright red.
Yes, exactly, crimson.
Yeah. I mean, people need to understand what these thresholds are, because then that's the problem with silos. Is like when you're talking about a third-party relationship, maybe IT security on a simple stoplight diagram, red, yellow, green, scored it a yellow. Bribery and corruption and compliance scored it as a yellow. Procurement on financial viability of a vendor, it's a yellow. And, we might have yellows across the board, and everybody's thinking, moderate risk, not a big deal. But if you actually look at the aggregate risk exposure and measured it that way, it might very well be a red and not a yellow.
Indeed. And a lot's been written about risk quantification and statistical approaches like Monte Carlo analysis and so on. Some people claim that it's too complex, or they don't have the data for quantitative assessment. What would you say to them?
Well, I mean, you're never going to get the data until you start. So it all starts with having the right information architecture to start collecting your historical loss information and number of risk events and things like that to populate that. And you can get risk experts out there and understand other things that have happened in the experience to populate data as well that's outside your organization, like peers in the industry as well. So, I mean, you can avoid risk quantification by saying we don't have what we need to get there, or you can start working on developing that information architecture that you can deliver it in the next year or two.
Thank you very much. Coming back to the point about interconnectedness of business across the supply chain, the partner ecosystem, the front office, back office, and so on, and change in one area having cascading effects, it sounds as though somehow we need to be able to model the critical dependencies and the effect of change on these dependencies. Do you have any sort of tips for our audience on how to do this?
Well, I mean, it starts off with documents, spreadsheets, and emails just aren't going to deliver on this. You need a database type architecture where you can cross-reference and show these relationships and be able to see that 360-degree contextual awareness of risk in the organization. And how risks relate to each other, how risks relate to controls, and how one control might relate to multiple risks, how risks impact different levels of the entity and process and assets of the organization. And you can look at an asset or a process or entity structural level and see all the risks and controls, things that apply in that context. I mean, you can't do this in documents, spreadsheets, and emails. It requires a database type architecture to be able to model and show these type of relationships.
Okay. Thank you. And final question, really, just as part of this, part of the webinar, just about the state, leading on from that point, the state of the GRC market for technology solutions. I mean, during this series, we've looked at the need for agile and cognitive GRC we've looked at enterprise risk management, we've looked at resiliency today. I mean, what do you think of the capability of legacy GRC vendors, those in the top right of the Gartner quadrant, to deliver the technology and services required to deliver modern GRC?
One player in the Gartner quadrant that has recently come in our Gartner quadrant in the last couple of years, I mean, they're marketing, operational risk and resiliency capabilities that aren't going to be available for another year. I mean, Monte Carlo analysis, scenario analysis, things like that, even though they're marketing it, they're not releasing that for another year. The other legacy players that are in that upper right, have, 20-year-old code under the hood. And they're putting pretty lovely, beautiful new interfaces on it, but under the hood, it's still old technology. I mean, code that's 15 to 20 years old, that's like your great-great-grandfather in IT terms. And so I find that, and if you want to look at Gartner's Magic Quadrants, the people that are in the upper right of Gartner tend to be the more costly ones to own. For every dollar you spend in software, you're typically spending between $3 and $5 on implementation costs. I mean, one of the firms that scores one of the highest in the upper right of Gartner, you can go out and look. I'm working with a firm in the Middle East that's going to RFP because, they implemented the solution 3 years ago and still have 0 users on the platform today. Because they've been trying to build it out over 3 years. Another one of the ones in the upper right of Gartner, I have 3 global firms that are looking at replacing it for operational risk because they're stuck on the last version of the product. To get to the next version of the product is such a huge project because of all the customization and coding and things that went into it, that it costs just as much to get to the next version of the product as it does to implement a whole new operational risk solution. So typically the ones in the upper right, for every dollar you spend in software, you're spending between $3 and $5 in implementation, build out, configuration, customization, and that's not even counting ongoing maintenance costs. And then but those that aren't in the upper right, for every dollar you spend on software, you typically spend between 50 cents to $1.50 on implementation and build out. There's a LinkedIn post that I just absolutely love from, I think it was 2 years ago, that described one of the Gartner's leaders, that one of the implementation of the Gartner leaders to the lyrics of the song Hotel California, that they're stuck and can't get out. After $500,000 in software licensing and $2 million in implementation, 3 years later, they're getting some basic functionality working. So be careful. You want agile solutions that can actually deliver in a timely manner value to the organization.
Interesting. Thank you very much for that, Michael. It's food for thought. Okay, please keep your questions coming in. If I'm onto those in a minute. Just a couple of resources that are available on the portal. So if you'd like to take a look at our stream brochure, or there's a bias checklist for GRC and integrated risk management available on the portal as well, or from our website. In terms of the capabilities of Stream, I'm not going to spend any time on this in this session, but this is just a quick summary of the core applications within Stream, and information on all of those is available on our website, together with previous webinars, white papers, blogs, and so on. So please feel free to take a look at the website. Just a reminder about the final webinar in this series, which is coming up in a couple of weeks' time. There have been a number of continuing themes through this webinar series. We touched on some of them again today. So the need for agility and responsiveness with fast time to value for our GRC and risk management programs. We talked about interconnectedness of risk. We talked about increasing complexity and dependencies across the entire business ecosystem, and the need for 360-degree contextual awareness in relation to those. We talked about the importance of an objectives-based approach to drive business performance and make risk-informed strategic decisions, and we've talked about the role of risk quantification in demonstrating value and ROI. And we'll be demonstrating all of those issues and how our Stream platform helps to address and deliver those in the final webinar on April the 7th. So please do join us for that. Michael's actually also reviewed our platform, Stream, spoken to our customers, and he's written a perspective on it. And that will be available in time for the next webinar as well on April the 7th. So we'll make that available at that webinar, as part of that webinar. but also make it available on the website as well for those of you that might be interested. Let's go on to some questions. So further information, as I already said, here available on our website. So Michael, just to bring us to the final part of the session, if I could just go through a couple of questions with you. The first one that's come in is asking about opportunity, often mentioned as a corollary to risk. Whether you have any sort of comments on how to address opportunity. Have you seen any good examples of that?
I mean, that's partly where we need to get aligned with performance and objective management. And I mentioned aligning risk to objectives because risk by definition, ISO 31000, is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And we need to understand the performance and objectives and therefore the opportunities of the organization to be able to do risk assessment. Risk requires context. And opportunity and objectives and performance, all this provides the context that we can measure and do risk assessments within. You cannot do a risk assessment without context. And to me, I mean, whether that context is an opportunity, like do we expand operations in this part of the world and what's the exposure and risks that might come with that? Or whether it's the actual performance and objectives. I mean, that all provide opportunity, performance, objectives. All those provide the context to properly conduct and deliver risk assessments in. And so, I mean, opportunity is sort of the flip side of the coin. I mean, in the previous webinar, I talked about some quotes. Teddy Roosevelt, the U.S. president, said that risk is like fire. If controlled, it will help you. If uncontrolled, it will rise up and destroy you. John Paul Jones, a famous U.S. Revolutionary War naval hero, he said when he's losing a battle against a larger British frigate, I have not yet begun to fight, and turn around and won that battle. He also said, it is a law of nature, inflexible and inexorable, that those who do not risk do not win. Mm-hmm. And then, Judge Mervyn Keane, the author of the Keane 1, 2, and 3 reports on corporate governance down in South Africa, and in British Commonwealth English, he said, enterprise is the undertaking of risk for reward. Translating, the British Commonwealth English to U.S. English, businesses take risks to make money. Opportunity is absolutely a piece of risk management. Risk is part of business. We seize on opportunities and therefore take on risk so that we can achieve greater return for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of links in nicely to the next question, actually. And that's just about appetite for risk. So we can have appetite to take risk to make money. And we also have an appetite in terms of the amount of risk that we can potentially tolerate. Do you have any sort of thoughts or tips on how to set risk appetite? It's something that's talked about quite a lot, but quite a complex thing to define.
It's a scary one to respond to because there are so many risk pundits and people that commentate on risk and things that they jump all over whenever you comment on risk appetite, because a lot of people don't like that term, and they find it misused, and it often is misused. But there is a point that you hit a risk capacity where there's failure in the organization, so there's a limit to how much risk we can take and exposure before we don't have enough capital and reserves, liquidity on hand to be able to respond to the risk if it materializes and becomes an event. And so, I mean, I think that there's a concept of risk appetite that organizations need. Sometimes it's hard to nail down and quantify. And so it becomes a very tricky area, and there's a lot of people ready to jump on you if you get it wrong or don't align particularly with their perspective. But I mean, I do like how the FCA, Bank of England, and PRA in their operational resiliency paper talk about impact tolerances, and and it's not quite the same as risk appetite. But what's the tolerable range of risk and things within a process? And so I like the overall approach from the UK regulators that step away from risk appetite to talk about impact tolerances when it comes to the resiliency discussion we went through today.
Great, perfect. Thank you, Michael. I think we better finish there. Any other questions we'll respond to separately. But Michael, thank you very much indeed. This is the final webinar in this series that you're involved in. It's been really thought-provoking, and I've really enjoyed the discussions that we've had. So a huge thank you for your insights. To the audience, I know Michael would be very interested to hear from you, his contact details are on the screen here. If you're not already in contact with him, I'm sure he'd welcome communication from you. The good news is that Michael will be back with Acuity. We're planning another series which we'll be announcing shortly. The first of those webinars is going to be on a huge topic at the moment, which is third-party risk or vendor supply chain risk, however you wish to refer to it, and that will be the first in our next series, but we'll communicate out further information about the next series over the coming weeks. Finally, if I could just remind you to please complete your surveys as you leave the session, and obviously if you would like have any other comments you'd like to get in touch with us, then again my details are on the screen. Please feel free to contact us. Okay, thanks again, and we'll hope to see you soon.